How smart are your kids going to be? Parents want their kids to be successful. For middle-class white and Asian American parents, education appears to be the key to success. Everybody knows that success in schools is a function of intelligence. The burning question is whether your kids are smart. Specifically, are they going to be as smart as you? Finding the answer to that simple question is harder than it should be. The evidence goes every which way. Gregory Clark of UC Davis tracked success within English families over a millennium. His book, The Sun Also Rises, found that the Pepys, Montgomerys, and Beechams outperformed the Joneses, Tinkers, and Smiths generation after generation from the time of the Norman Conquest up until now. There have been conspicuously successful family dynasties, such as the Bernoullis, the Huxleys, the Darwins, and of course the Rothschilds, where outstanding talent seems to flow from generation to generation. Francis Galton put his observations into an 1892 book entitled Hereditary Genius. My observation as a trustee, parent, and teacher in Washington, D.C. area private schools goes the other way. Eminently successful cancer researchers with NIH, downtown lawyers, and college professors seem to have spawned children whose achievements didn't measure up to their parents. As a case in point, my daughters played with Arianna Huffington's kids. There's no comparison between generations there. Only the most inveterate, die-hard liberals still refuse to concede that intelligence is hereditary. Statistics have told us that for 100 years. 20 years ago, the bell curve confirmed it. Research in genomics pounds the point home in study after study. Nobody denies that smart parents tend to have smart kids. Whatever they may believe about people in general, smart liberals tend to smugly believe that their own kids are smarter than the average bear. How much smarter is the $64,000 question? Start with the question, how smart are the parents? Schools told us of the silent generation and the greatest generation what our IQ scores were. About the time of the civil rights movement in the 60s, they shut up about it. However, people use standardized tests as a proxy. It's pretty good. You can look one up on the internet, but I'll tell you that a math verbal score of 1,000 equates to an IQ of about 100, 1,200 to 115, 1,400, maybe 130. Since the SATs top out at 1,600, above that it gets a bit fuzzy, but you're in up in the stratosphere anyhow, so don't worry about it. People who have been in the armed forces took the Armed Forces Qualifying Test in my day, or the Armed Forces Vocational Aptitude Battery, in which they tell you your scores. Once again, this is a fairly equivalent to an IQ score, and you can look on the internet to find out what the equivalence is. If you've forgotten your SAT score, or you don't think that it was a good representation, you can go to Wonderlic and take a free 50-question IQ test online. See the link displayed on the screen. Now, it's a fairly simple matter for parents to figure out their own intelligence. Beyond that, they know that intelligence is heritable. Now, how much? Stephen Hsu, the Caltech polymath, has put forth a formula. Since very few others in academia even want to touch the question of intelligence, his formula seems to be one that stands. The distribution of intelligence among children can be computed as follows, or estimated as follows. Take the average IQs of two parents. Subtract 100, take 60% of that difference and add the 100 back. In other words, if parents have IQs of 130 and 150, the average would be 140. Subtracting out 100, you get 40, 60% of that's 24, add back 100, you get 124. So their children would have an average IQ of 124. Ouch! That's dumber than either parent. Yep, that's Hughes' formula, and it seems viable. He also says, by the way, that the standard deviation around that average will be about 13. That's a bit less than the standard deviation of 15 for the population at large, but not a whole lot. The bottom line is this: the expected intelligence of the kids will be lower than the average of the parents. Though the ranges of intelligence will be narrower than the population at large, it's still pretty broad. Well, I didn't really believe this, so I did a spreadsheet simulation, and Hughes' model works. Using his statistics, 60% and standard deviation of 13, applied to a model of 10,000 people over 4 generations, I found that the average intelligence remained at 100, the average standard deviation, or the standard deviation, remained at 15, so it works. It forms a stable population. From generation to generation. So putting it bluntly, there are enough pleasant surprises coming from the hoi polloi rising up to offset the disappointments of the cognitive elite. Those of you listening to this video probably. I'm attaching a link to my spreadsheet here if you want to play with it yourself. The way that simulated intelligence jumps from generation to generation was interesting to observe. Looking at the smartest among the 10,000 simulated individuals in each generation of a 4-generation model, and comparing the intelligence within the 4 generations, you see great variations. The example that I'm showing here shows that is atypical in that the same family line has the smartest person for 2 generations running. What is atypical, or what is typical, is the extreme variety. Although each simulated family history includes people who are all above average, the lowest IQ is 108, which is only 1 person in 3. The highest, 172, is 1 person in a million. But that 1 in a million's kids model at 120. And that's kind of the way it works. Now, the idea of measuring intelligence makes people queasy, especially when it comes to the conclusion that different populations have different intelligences. But intelligence correlates pretty well with brain size. And in evolutionary terms, the growth of our brains has been extraordinarily rapid. When we split from the chimpanzees, our noggins were growing at only 0.03% per generation. In the last millennium, the growth rate is 10 times higher. But still, that's only a 1/7% increase in the last millennium. Not really enough to talk about. The difference since we left Africa among us European and Asian populations is only 7 or 8%. Different population groups do have different average intelligences. The average for Ashkenazi Jews, Japanese and Chinese exceeds that of people of European extraction. Stephen Hughes' 60% figure actually applies to the difference between the parents' intelligence and the average of their population. Their populations being somewhat higher, the smart Chinese and Jews are going to lose less from generation to generation than their, even though they lose some, they will lose less because the 40% that they lose is a smaller number, or the 40% from which they lose is smaller. Now, they used to point out that intelligence as measured by tests wasn't exactly right because it was growing 3% per generation, the so-called Flynn effect. However, common sense tells you that that isn't true. We just didn't seem to feel that people were getting smarter. and that Flynn effect, whatever it came from, hasn't been measured for a couple of decades now. That's gone away. You don't have to take evolution or the Flynn effect into effect for projecting where your children are going to be in one generation. Now, the lesson for everybody is that we need some humility. The smarter we are, the less likely it is that our kids are going to be as smart as we are. So a parent should appreciate their kids, whatever they are, teach them values, including the value of hard work, the value of family, and hope for the best and recognize that this is a very long game, and whether your intellect shows up in the next generation or goes down a little bit further, it's not going to be lost totally to your progeny. This is Graham Seibert signing off again from Kiev, where all of the women are good looking, the men are strong, and the children are above normal.